Please, just for a moment, close your eyes and listen. Can you hear the heavy ticking of the old wooden clock on the living room wall? Can you smell the faint, comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans mingling with the scent of tobacco in the air? Welcome back, my old friend. Today, we are going to take a slow, beautiful journey back to the Netherlands of our youth. We are returning to the days of the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. It was a profoundly different world back then. We are going to explore 20 completely normal things we all did during our childhoods, things that were simply a part of our daily routine, but which today are totally illegal or completely banned. We will remember the sights, the sounds, and the unwritten rules of a society that trusted us to navigate its rough edges. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end of our list, we will uncover a memory so deeply touching, it will remind you of the ultimate freedom we once possessed. Before we begin our journey, let us remember how time itself used to feel. Back then, time flowed slower, like a quiet Dutch canal on a Sunday afternoon. There was absolutely no rush. We did not have glowing screens in our pockets, demanding our constant attention. When we waited for a friend at the train station, we simply waited, watching the people go by, letting our minds wander. Modern society often tells us that without our current technology and strict safety rules, people in the past lived poorer, darker lives. But you and I know the absolute truth. Our lives were immensely richer in spirit. Human connection was vivid, physical, and real. We knocked on front doors without calling first. We shared our spaces, our air, and our stories without hesitation. We were not wrapped in a protective bubble of regulations. We learned about life by touching it, by scraping our knees, and by making our own mistakes. That raw, unpolished reality gave us a deep emotional resilience that defined our entire generation. Now, let us remember those long family road trips during the summer holidays in the 1960s and 70s. Do you remember the feeling of packing the car to the brim, ready to drive down to the south of France, or perhaps just to the coast of Zeeland? Back then, seatbelts in the back of the car were practically unheard of, and if you had a station wagon, the back was the ultimate playground for children. We would lay out blankets and pillows in the trunk, creating a cozy little nest. There were no strict child seats or booster seats to lock us in place. We would lie down, watch the clouds pass through the rear window, play board games, and occasionally squabble with our siblings. The smell of the vinyl seats warming up in the summer sun, mixed with the faint scent of gasoline, was the unmistakable perfume of our childhood adventures. We would bounce around over every bump in the road, completely free and unbothered by any safety regulations. Today, the very thought of letting children ride loose in the trunk of a car would result in hefty fines and absolute shock from anyone watching. But back then, it was just the normal way we traveled. It was our private little kingdom on wheels, where the journey itself was just as exciting as the destination, and where we felt a profound sense of freedom that modern children, strapped tightly into their 5-point harnesses, might never truly understand. Close your eyes and think about the familiar haze that seemed to hang in almost every public space during those days. Smoking was not just a habit, it was an integral part of daily Dutch life. I am talking about the time when you could light up a cigarette or a cigar absolutely anywhere. Do you recall the heavy glass ashtrays that sat on every single table in the living room, always ready for guests? Even more astonishing today is the memory of waiting rooms in hospitals or the compartments of the national railway trains. You would sit on those green or red train seats, the rhythmic clacking of the wheels beneath you, and the air would be thick with blue smoke. Doctors would sometimes smoke during a consultation, and teachers would have an ashtray on their desks. The smell of drum shag tobacco or a fresh Caballero cigarette was omnipresent. At birthday parties, the adults would sit in a circle, passing around plates of cheese and sausage, while the room filled with so much smoke that our eyes would sting. Yet no one complained. There were no designated smoking areas, no warning labels with terrifying pictures, and certainly no bans. Today, this level of indoor smoking is completely illegal and socially unacceptable, but in our memories, it remains a vivid, aromatic backdrop to nearly every social gathering, a time when sharing a light was the most common way to start a conversation. Speaking of tobacco, let us talk about a ritual that would absolutely horrify modern parents today. Think back to the street corners of your neighborhood in the 1970s. Hanging on the brick walls outside the local snack bar or the neighborhood pub, there were heavy, mechanical cigarette vending machines. They were made of sturdy metal, painted in bright colors, and they had a row of solid buttons that made a deeply satisfying, metallic clunk when you pressed them. As children, our fathers or grandfathers would often give us a few guilders and send us down the street to fetch a pack of their favorite brand. We were only 7 or 8 years old, but we would proudly march up to the machine, slide the heavy coins into the slot, pull the metal knob, and catch the pack as it dropped into the tray below. No one ever asked for our identification. No one batted an eye at a small child buying tobacco products in the middle of the afternoon. It was simply an errand, much like buying a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. The trust our parents placed in us to complete this little mission made us feel incredibly grown up and responsible. Today, those machines are entirely illegal, and the idea of a child buying cigarettes is unthinkable. Yet for us, it was just a completely normal, everyday chore that taught us the value of coins and the pride of helping out our parents. Now, think about the wonderful noise that filled the streets on a warm summer evening. It was the unmistakable, high-pitched roar of a moped. Whether it was a Puch, a Zundap, or a Kreidler, these machines were the absolute dream of every Dutch teenager. But what makes this memory so shocking by modern standards is how we rode them. Before the strict laws were introduced, wearing a helmet was not mandatory, and we took full advantage of that freedom. We would speed down the narrow country lanes and city streets, with the wind rushing through our hair, feeling completely invincible. Often, we would even tinker with the engines in our parents' garages, making them go much faster than they were legally supposed to. We did not have extensive protective gear, just our favorite denim jackets, flared trousers, and maybe a pair of sunglasses to keep the bugs out of our eyes. Young boys and girls would sit on the back, holding on tight to their sweethearts as they rode to the local dance hall or the cinema. The smell of two-stroke engine oil mixed with cheap cologne was the true scent of teenage rebellion and romance. Today, strict helmet laws, speed restrictions, and license requirements have made that kind of carefree riding completely illegal. But back then, our mopeds were our majestic steel horses, carrying us away from childhood and straight into the thrilling, unrestricted adventures of our youth. Let us step inside a typical Dutch living room during a birthday celebration in the 1960s or 70s. You surely remember the famous circle of chairs where everyone sat facing each other, exchanging congratulations. The coffee and pastries were soon replaced by something stronger. Back then, the legal drinking age was much more relaxed, and the cultural attitude towards alcohol was entirely different. It was incredibly common for a father to pour a small glass of beer or even a tiny sip of Jenever for a young teenager. We were only 14 or 15, yet we were proudly holding our glasses, clinking them with our uncles and grandfathers. At the local sports clubs, after a muddy football match on a Sunday morning, the canteen would be filled with young boys drinking beer, and no one ever asked to see an identity card. We learned how to drink within the safety of our families or our tight-knit communities. There was a sense of initiation into adulthood that happened naturally around the kitchen table. Today, the laws are incredibly strict, with the age limit firmly set at 18 and heavy fines for any bartender who dares to serve a minor. But in our youth, a small glass of beer was not seen as a danger, but rather as a warm invitation into the adult world, a gesture of trust that made us feel respected and truly part of the family circle. Do you remember the distinctive smell of burning leaves and branches that used to drift through our neighborhoods during the autumn months? In those days, getting rid of garden waste or old household items was a completely different experience. We did not have neatly organized green bins or strictly regulated municipal recycling centers. Instead, when the leaves fell or when it was time for a big yard cleanup, our fathers would simply pile everything up in the garden or even on the edge of the street and set it on fire. We would stand around the crackling bonfire, watching the orange flames dance in the crisp autumn air. Sometimes neighbors would join in, throwing their own trimmings onto the pile, and it would turn into a small, impromptu social gathering. We would roast marshmallows or potatoes in the glowing embers, the smoke clinging to our woolen sweaters for days. It was a rustic, beautiful way to mark the changing of the seasons. Today, lighting an open fire in your garden is strictly forbidden in almost every Dutch municipality due to environmental and safety regulations. You would have the fire brigade and the police at your door in a matter of minutes. But for us, that smoky autumn air is a deeply comforting memory, a symbol of a time when the world was less regulated and life felt much simpler. Now let us remember where we spent most of our free time as children. Before the era of strictly regulated playgrounds with soft rubber flooring, our favorite places to play were often newly built neighborhoods and active construction sites. In the post-war boom of the 1960s, the Netherlands was constantly building, and to a child, these sandy, half-finished plots were magical kingdoms. After the workers went home, we would sneak in. We climbed up the wooden scaffolding like monkeys, balanced precariously on concrete foundation walls, and jumped over deep, muddy trenches. We used discarded wooden planks and bent nails to build our own secret fortresses. There were no high fences, no warning signs, and certainly no security cameras to chase us away. We came home with scraped knees, splinters in our hands, and our clothes covered in yellow sand and grey cement dust. Our mothers would scold us for ruining our trousers, but they never truly worried about our safety. Today, a construction site is a fortress of health and safety regulations, completely illegal and impossible for a child to enter. But those dangerous, thrilling playgrounds taught us balance, courage, and imagination. We learned how to assess risks for ourselves, forging unforgettable childhood bonds among the bricks and mortar. Think back to how we used to travel when we were young, adventurous, and practically penniless. Hitchhiking was not just a last resort, it was a perfectly normal, widely accepted way to see the country and the world. You would stand on the side of a provincial road or near a highway on-ramp, holding a piece of cardboard with your destination hastily written in thick black marker. Maybe you were trying to get to a music festival, or perhaps you were heading all the way to Paris or the sunny beaches of Spain. We stood there with our thumbs out, feeling the rush of passing cars, trusting that a kind stranger would soon pull over. And they almost always did. Truck drivers, traveling salesmen, and friendly families would open their doors to us. We shared sandwiches, listened to the radio together, and exchanged fascinating life stories with people we would never meet again. It was a beautiful exercise in human trust and solidarity. Today, hitchhiking has almost entirely disappeared. It is often illegal on many modern roads, and the world has grown far too fearful and cynical to invite a stranger into a car. But those spontaneous journeys gave us an incredible sense of independence. We learned that the world was mostly filled with good, helpful people, a comforting lesson that has stayed with us for a lifetime. Let us talk about the weeks leading up to New Year's Eve, a time that used to sound very different than it does today. In the 1970s and 80s, the Dutch obsession with fireworks was truly wild and gloriously unregulated. Long before December 31st, the streets would echo with loud bangs. We did not just have mild sparklers, we had heavy, thunderous fireworks like strikers and flinders that we often bought legally or traded in the schoolyard. Young boys would walk around with their pockets full of explosives, setting them off in empty tin cans, storm drains, or under old bicycles, just to see how high they would fly. There were no protective safety glasses, no strict selling times, and certainly no designated firework-free zones. We would stand right next to the explosion, feeling the shockwave in our chests, surrounded by the thick, sulphurous smell of gunpowder. It was loud, dangerous, and absolutely exhilarating. Today, those heavy firecrackers are completely illegal, and the rules surrounding New Year's Eve are incredibly strict to protect public safety. Yet, anyone who grew up in that era cannot help but smile at the memory of those explosive, chaotic December days when the thrill of lighting a fuse and running away was the ultimate winter adventure. Close your eyes and recall the most common mode of transport in our beautiful country. Bicycles have always been part of the Dutch soul, but the way we rode them back then would give a modern safety inspector a heart attack. If you had somewhere to go and a friend with a bike, you simply jumped on. We rode on the back luggage carrier, swinging our legs freely, or we sat sideways on the front handlebars, our view bouncing with every cobblestone. Mothers would ride through busy city centers with 3 or 4 children balanced precariously on one heavy steel bicycle. There were no plastic child seats with secure harnesses, no spoke protectors to keep our feet out of the wheels, and absolutely no one wore a bicycle helmet. We balanced bags of groceries, younger siblings, and school bags all at once, riding through the rain and the wind. If your foot got caught in the spokes, you learned a painful lesson and got right back on. Today, the laws and social norms demand strict safety standards, secure seating, and constant vigilance. But back then, the bicycle was an extension of our bodies, an unregulated vessel of freedom that taught us balance and resilience, moving together in a chaotic but beautiful, synchronized dance through the streets of our youth. Do you remember those incredibly hot summer days when the air felt thick and the only thing we wanted was to cool down? We did not have fancy chlorinated municipal swimming pools on every corner. Instead, we would grab our towels and run straight to the nearest canal, river, or sand extraction lake. We would strip down to our swimming costumes and jump right into the murky water without a second thought. There were no official water quality checks, no lifeguards blowing whistles, and no warning signs about dangerous bacteria or strong undercurrents. We swam alongside passing barges, waving at the captains and diving off high concrete bridges. Sometimes the water was brownish-green, and we would emerge with duckweed clinging to our shoulders and mud between our toes. We did not care about the risks of pollution or unseen obstacles beneath the surface. Today, swimming in most of those working canals and unregulated lakes is strictly prohibited, with hefty fines for anyone caught taking a dip. The water is heavily monitored, and spontaneity has been replaced by strict rules. But those wild, unsupervised afternoons in the local waterways were pure magic, giving us a deep, tactile connection to the natural landscape of our country that felt beautifully, endlessly free. Now, let us think about a sight that was perfectly common in our towns and villages, but which would cause absolute panic today. Imagine walking down a busy shopping street in the 1960s. Outside the butcher shop, the bakery, or the local cafe, you would see a row of large, beautiful prams with large, spoked wheels. Inside those prams were peacefully sleeping babies, completely unattended. Mothers would simply park their infants on the sidewalk, pop into the shop to buy their groceries or chat with the baker, and come back out 10 or 15 minutes later. No one worried about kidnapping, and no one thought it was irresponsible. In fact, people believed the fresh air was very good for the child. Passers-by would occasionally peek into the carriage and smile at the sleeping baby, acting as an informal community watch. It was a society built on an immense, unspoken trust. Today, leaving a baby alone outside a shop would instantly result in the police being called and the parents facing severe legal consequences. The world has grown more anxious and protective, but remembering those prams outside the bakery reminds us of a time when the whole neighborhood felt like one large extended family, and trust was the very foundation of our daily lives. Let us drift back to the magical freezing winters of our childhood, when the canals froze solid and the streets were covered in a thick blanket of snow. Winter fun in those days was delightfully improvised and thrillingly dangerous. One of the greatest joys was waiting for a brave father or older brother to bring out the family car. We would take our wooden sleds with their rusty iron runners, tie them to the rear bumper of the car with a thick piece of rope, and hold on for dear life. The car would slowly drive down the snow-covered residential streets, and we would glide behind it, screaming with laughter as the icy wind hit our faces. If the car turned a corner, our sleds would swing out wildly in a wide, snowy arc. We inevitably tumbled off into the snowbanks, brushing ourselves off and running to catch up again. There were no winter tires, no seatbelts, and absolutely zero safety regulations governing this wild ride. Today, tying a sled to a motorized vehicle on a public road is extremely illegal and would be considered reckless driving. But in our memories, those snowy afternoons were the absolute pinnacle of winter joy, a thrilling adventure where the entire neighborhood turned into our own private, snowy amusement park. Do you recall the familiar rattling sound that signaled the start of a new day? It was the local milkman, the melkboer, pushing his heavy cart or driving his small electric van down the street. In the early days, long before the era of plastic bottles and supermarket aisles, milk was an entirely different experience. We would run outside with our empty glass jugs or metal pails, and the milkman would use his metal ladle to pour the milk straight from a massive, cold churn. Much of this milk was raw, fresh from the cow, and completely unpasteurized. It had a thick layer of yellow cream floating on top, and it tasted richer and sweeter than anything you can buy today. We drank it happily, without any fear of bacteria or pathogens. The milkman knew every family, knew exactly how much you needed, and always had a cheerful word for our mothers. Today, selling raw, unpasteurized milk directly to consumers in that manner is strictly regulated or entirely illegal due to health and safety laws. The modern, sterile cartons have lost the romance of that daily interaction. We miss not just the rich, creamy taste of that fresh milk, but the beautiful, reliable routine of the milkman who connected the countryside directly to our front doors. Think about the sheer, unadulterated freedom we possessed the moment we stepped out of our front doors. On weekends and during the summer holidays, our parents would literally send us outside after breakfast and tell us not to come back until dinner time. We were a roaming tribe of neighborhood children, completely free from adult supervision. We built secret camps in the local woods, wandered miles away from our homes, and crossed busy roads entirely on our own. We had no mobile phones, no GPS trackers, and no way to be reached. The only rule was to listen for our mothers calling our names, or to make sure we were home the very second the streetlights flickered on in the evening. We solved our own disputes, invented our own games, and learned how to navigate the world through trial and error. Today, allowing young children to roam so far from home for entire days without any way to contact them would be considered severe neglect, perhaps even illegal in some contexts. But that boundless freedom was the greatest gift we were ever given. It taught us independence, resilience, and a deep, intuitive understanding of our surroundings that a childhood spent safely indoors simply cannot provide. Let us look back at the humble garden sheds and garage roofs of our old neighborhoods. This memory is a stark reminder of how much the world has changed. In the 1960s and 70s, a material called Eterniate was incredibly popular. It was cheap, waterproof, and seemed like a miracle building material. We used these grey, corrugated sheets to roof our bicycle sheds, build our tree houses, and even cover our garden fences. What we did not fully realize back then was that these sheets were made of asbestos. When a sheet broke or needed to be cut to size, our fathers would simply take a saw to it, sending clouds of white, toxic dust into the air. We would play around the dust, completely unaware of the invisible danger. It was just a normal part of weekend do-it-yourself projects. Today, the very word asbestos causes panic. It is strictly illegal to use, and removing it requires teams of professionals in full protective hazmat suits, sealing off the area like a crime scene. Looking back, it is truly terrifying to think of how casually we handled such a hazardous material, but it perfectly captures the innocence of that era, a time when we trusted the materials around us and lived blissfully unaware of the microscopic dangers hidden in our own backyards. Now, let us discuss a cultural norm that has thankfully changed, but which vividly defines the social life of the past. Think back to a lively evening at the local pub or a festive gathering at a community hall. The music was loud, the conversation was flowing, and the Genever and beer were heavily consumed. When the night finally ended, it was astonishingly common for people to walk out, get into their cars, and drive home after having several drinks. The strict breathalyzer tests, the severe penalties, and the intense social stigma surrounding drinking and driving simply did not exist in the same way they do now. People would say they drove better after a few drinks to calm their nerves, and the police would often turn a blind eye if you were not causing an obvious disturbance. Today, driving under the influence is heavily penalized, entirely illegal, and universally condemned as a reckless and selfish act. It is truly a relief that the laws have changed to make our roads much safer, but remembering those nights reminds us of a wilder, much more careless time, when the boundaries of personal responsibility were blurred, and society operated on a dangerous but genuine sense of misguided trust. Think back to your school days and the classmates who suddenly stopped showing up when they were just 14 or 15 years old. In the 1960s and early 70s, the laws surrounding compulsory education were vastly different. It was incredibly common, especially in working-class neighborhoods or farming communities, for young boys and girls to leave school early to start working. They would become apprentices in a bakery, start laying bricks on a construction site, or help out full-time on the family farm. They handed their weekly wages directly to their mothers in a small brown envelope to help support the household. There was an immense sense of pride in learning a real trade and contributing to the family. Today, strict truancy laws and mandatory education requirements mean that dropping out of school at that age is completely illegal. Every child must stay in the educational system until they are much older. While this modern approach ensures a better academic foundation for everyone, we often miss the respect and dignity that was given to practical manual labor. Those young workers grew up fast, possessing a mature work ethic and real-world skills that many university graduates today could only dream of having. Let us revisit a quiet, gentle ritual that almost every Dutch child experienced on a Sunday afternoon. After a long week, there was always a bag of old, stale bread hanging in the kitchen. When it started to get hard or even slightly moldy, we did not throw it in the garbage. Instead, we took the bag and walked down to the local park or the village pond. There, we would tear the bread into chunks and throw it to the eager ducks and swans. The water would boil with flapping wings and quacking bills as the birds fought over the crusts. It was a peaceful, beautiful way to connect with nature, and parents felt good about teaching us not to waste food. We would stand on the wooden bridges, watching the ripples in the water, feeling a simple, profound joy. Today, this innocent activity is actually banned in many Dutch municipalities. Signs are posted everywhere threatening fines, as we now know that moldy bread is bad for the birds' health and pollutes the water. It is illegal to feed them in this way now. Yet, that simple act of sharing our leftovers with the local wildlife remains one of the warmest, most tranquil memories of our youth, a small act of kindness that defined our leisurely Sunday afternoons. Finally, let us remember the absolute joyful chaos of Koninginnedag, our old Queen's Day. Long before it became King's Day with strict municipal rules, April 30th was a day of pure, glorious anarchy on the streets. Anyone, of any age, could claim a piece of the pavement with a blanket and sell absolutely anything they wanted. You did not need a permit, you did not need to pay taxes, and health inspectors were nowhere to be found. Grandmothers sold homemade croquettes and incredibly sweet cakes that sat out in the sun all day. Teenagers sold their old, rusty bicycles, and children played the violin for a few guilders. The streets smelled of spilled beer, frying oil, and blooming tulips. It was a massive, unregulated flea market where the entire nation turned into merchants for a single day. Today, while the tradition continues, it is heavily regulated. You cannot simply sell perishable homemade food without hygiene certificates, and many areas require pre-booked spots or permits. The true, lawless spirit of the old Queen's Day is technically a thing of the past, but in our hearts, the memory of that brilliant orange chaos lives on, reminding us of a time when our country felt wonderfully free, perfectly safe, and incredibly united. As we reach the end of our journey, it becomes incredibly clear to us. When we look back at these forgotten, now illegal things, we are not truly mourning the loss of danger or a lack of rules. What we actually miss is the profound feeling of our youth. We miss that unspoken trust between neighbors, the raw and unfiltered connection with the world around us, and a time when society felt like one big, resilient family. We miss the slow ticking of the clock, the unhurried days, and the absolute freedom to simply be ourselves. If this journey through the Netherlands of our childhood brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to share these beautiful memories together. Now, I have an important question for you. Which of these 20 memories touched your heart the most? Or is there another completely normal thing from your Dutch childhood that would be strictly forbidden today? Please sit down, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and share your personal story in the comments below. I promise to read every single one. Thank you for walking down memory lane with me, and until next time, take wonderful care of yourselves.